Hello and welcome back to our Final Destination retrospective here on the Evolution of Horror. This week we've been dropping daily episodes from the Patreon archive with deep dive discussions of every movie in the Final Destination franchise, which I recorded for Patreon back in 2023. You can now access the first 3 episodes of that retrospective in which we discuss all 5 movies in the original Final Destination series. They dropped earlier this week. Now, later this week, I'll be dropping a deep dive discussion of the brand new movie, Final Destination Bloodlines, so stay tuned for that. But today, I'm going to repost my discussion from 2 years ago with the creator of the Final Destination franchise, Jeffrey Reddick. This is the man who came up with the initial conceit for the first movie and is therefore responsible for this entire franchise existing. Now, this conversation was recorded in 2023 before we knew for definite any of the details about Final Destination Bloodlines. But it's a really fun discussion, so I just wanted to share it with everybody again ahead of the new movie. So please enjoy my conversation with the creator of Final Destination, Jeffrey Reddick.
In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes. What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail. Every single move we make, from the mundane to the monumental, the red light that we stop at or run, the people we have sex with or won't with us, the airplanes that we ride or walk out of. It's all part of death's sadistic design, leading to the grave.
Design? Does that mean if you figure out the design, you can cheat death?
Alex, you've already done that by walking off the plane. Your friend's departure shows that death has a new design for all of you. You have to figure out how and when it's coming back at you. Play your hunch, Alex, if you think you can get away with it. But remember, the risk of cheating the plan, of disrespecting the design, could incite a fury that could terrorize even the Grim Reaper. And you don't even want to fuck with that, Mac Daddy.
It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast the writer and creator of the original Final Destination, Jeffrey Reddick. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hey, how are you doing there, Mike?
Really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I didn't have caffeine this morning, so I'm just making that energy, on my own.
Oh my God. Well, thank you for being here without the caffeine. That's very thoughtful of you. So I would love to start off by asking you a little bit about the origins of Final Destination. Let's just start at the very beginning. How did this idea first come to you? Am I right in thinking that Final Destination originally started life as a kind of spec script for an X-Files episode? Is that right?
Yes. It was never submitted to the X-Files, but I wrote it to get an agent. I'll start at the very beginning. I got the kernel for the idea when I was actually, that's funny because the kernel for this idea and then the kernel for the opening of the second one, but I came when I was going home from New York to Kentucky to visit my family, and I was taking a flight and I read an article about a woman, and I don't remember exactly. I think she was going to Hawaii for like her vacation, and her mother had told her not to take the next flight. She was supposed to be on the next day because she had a bad feeling about it. So the woman changed her flight, and the story was like, did she avert death? Because the plane that she was on crashed. And so I was on a plane and I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. So just something I filed away in my head as like an interesting, somebody calling, like I have a bad feeling about a flight. And I moved to New York when I was 19. I was studying acting for a while, segued over into writing. And so to get an agent back in the day, they would have you write a spec script for something that was on TV, so that they could know that you could write other characters' voices. So X-Files was my favorite show at the time on TV, as I think it was so many people's. And I was like, oh, that would be a good setup for like an opening scene, for an X-Files episode. And I decided to make it Scully's brother Charles, who was kind of like the brother we didn't see a lot of, in the show. And so, I wrote it as an X-Files episode. I was really proud of the script. But one of my friends at New Line Cinema, I actually, when I went to New York, I started interning at New Line Cinema. One of my friends there was like, dude, this is a really good idea for a feature. So I'm kind of mixing in how the business stuff happened as well as a creative. But at the time, I had a really good friend of mine, Chris Bender, who worked at New Line Cinema. He had started working for two producers, Warren Zeid and Craig Perry, who had a first look deal at New Line. So by this point, I'd been at New Line for about 6 years. And I'd submitted stuff I'd written. Some of my early stuff was horrible. You get better as you go, reading a lot of scripts and stuff like that. So I knew at that point, I was like, if I have an idea, I should hook up with a producer who's got a deal at New Line to bring it into New Line as opposed to me just handing it in myself. Because I just knew that would help kind of give it some legitimacy outside of, he works here. So I gave it to Warren Zeid and Craig Perry, and Chris Bender, and they picked, I had like 3 ideas, and they picked that one to develop. And we developed it into like probably a 14-page treatment, which was kind of a whole movie beat it out. And it kept changing. Originally, it was all adults, and then Scream came out, and then it was such a hit, and it's one of my favorite movies too. And they're like, well, teenagers are hot again, so we should make them all teenagers. So then I changed it to a American class going to France. And it was a hard sell, honestly, because they love the concept, but they're like, we just don't get how you can have death be the killer. Like every horror franchise has like a Freddy or a Jason, and we don't get the death thing. We don't understand it. So we ended up kind of doing a half and half where there was like, you don't see anything. There's like a shadowy figure that's kind of taunting the kids. And my original script was very dark because I wanted to kind of set up that since Alex had the premonition, he wasn't supposed to die in the crash. Like he doesn't realize this till later, but everybody else was. And also I was like, well, death couldn't get them the first time. So I was basically, because I'm a huge Nightmare on Elm Street fan, there was a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street influence where death was basically mind screwing. Watch my language. Every time I get on a podcast, I start cursing left and right. So I'm.
You can curse on this podcast. It's fine. Okay. Don't worry.
Well, no, but death like mind fuck the kids over something, like their Survivors Guild and stuff, and they would end up killing themselves. But it would kind of look, at first it wasn't just looking like they had Survivors Guild and were killing themselves. But it was a lot more dark and heavy. So wrote that draft. The first time I've ever experienced for myself, and a lot of people, like the studio greenlit it off the first draft. And we actually went out to Clive Barker. That was the first director we went out to, and he passed on it. But then, we went out to James Wong and Glenn Morgan, who actually worked on the X-Files.
Yeah.
So Bob Shea, who kind of kept me very involved in the process, was like, what do you think about James Wong and Glenn Morgan? I'm like, oh my God, I fucking love those guys.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite episodes of the X-Files. So they came on and they did a pretty big restructuring of the script. And the thing that I am very appreciative of is I think my dark version would have been very, horror fans and Nightmare fans would have loved it, but it would have been very specific to that. And it was James and Glenn who came up with the Rube Goldberg aspect of it, like death using, instead of death haunting you, and tormenting you directly, it would just use things around you to kill you. So that, I think, grounded it in the real world, and probably made it a lot more accessible, because I've met so many people over the years who are like, I don't normally like horror films, but this one I like because it's not, it's bloody, but it's kind of fun bloody. So yeah, that first movie, I went down to visit set. I actually shot a cameo, which never made it anywhere. Like they built a whole like aircraft security checkpoint. I was a security guard waving Alex and the crew and checking them out. And that scene, it's in storage somewhere. I'm gonna have to start like a hashtag movement, like release the Jeffrey cameo. But no, it was a great experience being at a studio and watching it kind of develop, and giving notes on the rewrites and and things like that, and visiting the set. I lived in New York and not Los Angeles, so I'd kind of grown up in the uber creative side of it.
Yeah.
You know, the New York was very creative. Not that the LA office was creative as well, but that's where, you know, all the, you know, stars and all the agents and all the bigwigs were. So, you know, watching them put the marketing campaign together, like it was a lot of fun. And when the movie came out, suspected that it would do well. I mean, I didn't ever suspect that kind of the phrase like the Final Destination moment or something like that was going to like be part of the culture. Like you don't expect something like that, but I always had planned on it at least having a sequel or two, like in my brain. I was like, you know, and I remember when it opened, because horror movies, you know, they usually open really big and then they drop about 50% on their second weekend. And New Line was still, they liked the movie, it tested well, but they still weren't sure how general audiences would take not having a killer that you could see running around. So they did a decent marketing push, but they didn't put as much money behind it as they would have like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But when the box office you know, numbers were coming in during the week, they were like, oh shit, the movie's actually ticking up and not going down. So the second week it actually did better than the first week. So then they started pumping money into marketing.
Yeah.
And it really became a word of mouth hit. I mean, that's one of the rare like word of mouth hits because the audiences were talking about it, and it just, yeah, it stayed there. If I remember correctly, it stayed in the top 5 box office over every other movie that was released in March that year. There were a couple of big studio movies that came out that opened big, but by the end of the month, they dropped out of the top 5, and we were still in the top 5. So
that's amazing. Well, I remember the marketing at the time. I would have been about 13 when this film came out in the UK, and I remember being so excited. By that point, I was already a big horror fan. I was obsessed with sort of Scream and the 90s slashers, and yeah, I remember there was that marketing for the film that would kind of show night vision footage of audiences kind of screaming in cinemas and all that kind of thing. Yeah, and so like, you know, that kind of stuff was really exciting, and I loved the film when I first saw it. And I think there's that really interesting balance in Final Destination of making it incredibly scary but also making it incredibly fun, right? And I just wanted to ask you, how was that for you as a writer, kind of pulling off that balance, I suppose, because we're dealing with teenagers facing death here, and this first movie in particular, this changes in the sequels I think, but in the first movie there is that real weight of death and grief and loss. You know, you feel the weight of death in that first movie, as well as it being this kind of roller coaster ride, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of a hallmark of most of the things that I write. Like, I mean, I love being scared, but I love being entertained scared. Like again, Nightmare on Elm Street is like one of my favorite movies, and the first one is terrifying, but because Freddy's having so much fun, you know, kind of toying with the victims, and you know, Nancy's such a great final girl, and everything is so amazing. Like, for me, it's always been about having fun with the movies. So that's part of my creative DNA when I write stuff, is I try to write. I mean, even though I know the suicide version sounds really heavy, there was humor coming from the characters, and some of the humor was from the like, oh shit kind of way that people died. So, you know, I think especially, you know, James, Glenn, I think they both have a very, you know, dark sense of humor if you look at their work as well. So I think they brought that to play in the first movie. You know, they just have a dark sense of humor, and you know, it's in all of their work as well. So yeah, you know, I think that's it. And so by the time we got to the second one, because I knew the death's MO had changed from like, you know, mentally driving you to commit suicide to like the Rube Goldberg thing. Then for the second one, it was just trying to come up with fun things that where people see or kind of are in everyday situations where they find themselves in everyday situations. And I think that's kind of the key to the success of the films is it is like, you know, you try to create moments that a majority of people will find themselves in several times in their lives, so that when they go to like the eye doctor, or when they get behind a log truck, or, you know, it's something like that, like they're gonna be like, Ugh.
Yeah. No, totally. I think that's true. It taps into something very human, I think, about all of us, particularly those first couple of movies. Are you somebody, Jeffrey, generally who kind of thinks about death a lot? Are you somebody that catastrophizes? You know, I've got friends who say every time they kind of walk across the street, it occurs to them that something might happen to them or whatever. Are you that sort of person?
No, I'm kind of the opposite. I think I probably should not catastrophize more. I do that about work stuff. Like,
yeah,
I did it about industry work stuff, but I have a friend that's like, yeah, you should write a will. I'm like, I'm too young to write a will. He's like, no, you're not. I'm like, I guess so. I clearly probably don't worry. I mean, I'm mindful of my safety, but yeah, I don't walk around worrying about. And then sometimes I'll hear about a friend who's died suddenly, and then it shocks me. But I don't know. My mom lived to be 97, so I just kind of have this thing in my head like that. At least I'm going to be around till like 97. So
amazing.
Plenty of time to worry about death.
Yeah. Do you ever get a fear of flying or anything like that when you get on a plane? No,
I don't get a fear of flying. I've been on a couple of flights where there was a lot of turbulence, and my first thought was like, well, this would be ironic. I don't think that. I think that's the misuse of ironic, actually. Morissette in that song. But I'd be like, this would be funny, if this happened. But I don't, like, I would never skydive. Like, there are things I would just never do, like never skydive. But yeah, flying and things. I don't like roller coasters. I didn't come up with that one. That was James and Glenn, but I only like the roller coaster if it loops once. And a smaller loop, like if it's one of those friggin' tycoon ones or what, where it's like cyclones, I'm like, no way, forget it. So I don't like being out of control in situations, but flying, I don't really. Yeah, I don't worry about flying or
that first movie as well. I mean, like in some ways, it was such a different era, wasn't it? And of course, it was pre 9/11 as well, right? Yeah. I mean, like, what would have happened had that movie been made like a year later or 18 months later, right? Like, I wonder would it have happened, I suppose?
I honestly don't think it would have, actually. Where they would have changed if it had been shot, they probably wouldn't have released it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I know that it's always just because there's some rumors I like to address, but I saw the movie in '97, and I know there was an actual plane that was flying from New York to France that crashed, and people thought that we wrote the movie. Like, people don't know how long it takes to make movies, so they thought that the movie was inspired by that. And it's like, no, like I try not to. Like, I should say never, because as I get older, I might get desperate and just be like, screw it, I'll take advantage of something horrible that happened. but I like that. Yeah, that wasn't part of, that was a tragedy that happened after the movie was in the can.
Yeah, of course. I keep wondering if we're going to get a wave of COVID horror movies at some point soon. Like, we've had The Odd Couple, right? But I keep wondering, it's going to be really interesting to see what horror cinema particularly is going to look like in the wake of everything that's happened over the last 2 or 3 years, as well. But like you said, it takes a long time, I'm sure, for these things to happen. So we probably won't know for another decade, how that ripple effect occurred,
Well, is he sick? Kevin Williamson's movie?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually gotten it's still not gotten a release here, which is so annoying, because I love Kevin Williamson, but I haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Okay, I think his movie, of the COVID movies I've seen so far, like that one, I think feels like it's really takes place during that time, but it also is saying it doesn't feel like a gimmick. Like, that's all I want to say. It's a really good movie.
And actually, speaking of Kevin Williamson as well, I mean, you mentioned, so you made some changes for it to kind of fit in with that kind of wave of Scream kind-esque horror movies, I guess, right? Through the late 90s, which is a really kind of interesting thing.
With the younger characters,
Right.
Yeah, because in my original version, there was like an elderly couple that got off the plane, and there was there were a couple of teenagers, but then there were adults and older. There was an elderly couple too. Mm-hmm. But that was at the treatment stage, and then Scream came out, and they're like, "How about we make them teenagers?" I'm like, "All right." Like, I know this is, yes, I will make them teenagers.
Yeah, perfect. What do you and that incredible cast too, right? Like it felt like it was again in keeping with that wave of horror movies that we were getting at that point. You know, I remember even that those sort of times you'd always get the posters with the kind of lineup of the teen cast, right? And these were the movies I grew up watching and loving, but that was also like a who's who of kind of teen sort of TV and movie stars, right, at the time. Which is very cool.
It was really cool because Devon Sawa was obviously had done a lot at that point, and it was so nice because I wanted to shake things up a little bit and have a final guy in my movie. And Ali Larter had come off of Varsity Blues, and so she was really hot. And the funny thing is, Craig Perry, I always call him like I don't want to call him the grandfather, that makes him sound old, but he's like the stepdaddy of the franchise. He's a producer that's been with it from the beginning, and I adore that man. He's one of the best producers I've worked with, but he also produced American Pie. So basically was like, hey, there's this kid, Sean William Scott, and you guys got to put him in Final. Like, this kid's going to blow up. And so we got Stifler like before he,
amazing.
I mean, he blew up with American Pie, but we got him like while he was still not blown up to the world. So
yeah,
from Dawson's Creek and Amanda Ditmer, and of course my favorite, Tony Todd. So I had it was funny because I lived in New York at the time, and we're seeing a shift now, obviously, with showing diversity and casting. But since the movie was set in New York, the only thing I said is like, hey, let's just make sure the class looks like it's from New York. I wrote like one character. In my draft, it was a sister that got on the plane and a sister that stayed off, and James changed them to brothers. But in my script, it was two black sisters. But I was like, at least, even in the background, let's make it look like New York. But they shot it in Canada. We've shot most of my movies in Canada. I actually love Canada. So I think probably, that got lost in translation when they started casting everybody in Canada. So they're like, well, we would like to get Tony Todd for the Mortician. What do you think about that? I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Get Tony Todd for anything in my movie and I will be dead, because Candyman's one of my favorite. I've got like 5, and Candyman's in my top 5 for sure. And so I had the pleasure of meeting all of them. I'm still really good friends with Devin, and Tony, and I just love both of them. They're just so freaking amazing.
There's a theory fans have about Tony Todd's character, right? The mortician character. Is there something actually supernatural about him in your head? Like, when he arrives, he kind of like emerges from these like fires of hell almost, right? And he kind of pops up at these strange times. What is your kind of interpretation of his character?
My interpretation is that, and this is not a cop-out, this is just, he's been kept vague for a reason. To let and because honestly, like in my I go back to like in my draft, that character was a guy who had been through what Alex had gone through. So he was one that was like, I survived by doing this, and you weren't supposed to die in the crash. So when James and Glenn brought up, did the rewrite, they made him a mortician, and so they kept him intentionally vague. And then I know when we started working on the second movie, and then, on the subsequent sequels, I've known that they've intentionally wanted to just keep like who and how he knows all this stuff vague. Like, is he like, is he death? Is he like just at a hinge?
Yeah.
Is he somebody that's just really because he knows all the rules. Like he knows,
right.
Which always change every movie on how you can get out of this. But yeah, I mean, I think his character is one of the fan favorites. I mean, he's, I'm hoping he comes back for the next one. I'm hoping they bring him back for the next one, because
what are your, like, before I move on to the next movie, I just want to ask, like, it's been 23 years since this movie was released. Like, how often do you revisit the original Final Destination, and what are your sort of thoughts on it now? Like, when you look back at it, do you still think it holds up? Is there anything that you would change about it? Like, what are your thoughts generally on it?
I mean, I've seen it a lot. Either for myself or like screenings, or if I go to like conventions and stuff, they'll be like, let's watch Final Destination. And I love it. But yeah, I see that, even from the dailies when they first were coming in to like rough cuts. I've seen a movie a lot. I do think it holds up. Especially again, if you're not a horror fan, like I think it's a really good gateway, kind of scary, fun movie to get you into place. I love most of it. I mean, there's a couple of things there's a couple of like things that were done with characters that I was like, oh, I think this character could be more layered, or this could be, done better. But overall, it's my first big movie. And yeah, I'm just really happy with how it turned out. Like, I mean, it's got a great visual style to it. I think, Devin does an amazing job as Alex.
He's incredible. Yeah.
There's so many layers to that, and it's, and again, it's part of, society, but you're not used to seeing like a lot, except, more recently, but you weren't used to seeing like final guys in movies back then who had to be like scared and frightened and still strong and stuff like that. So he just brought so many layers of that character that, but we had a great cast. There's not a bad egg in the cast. And
Carter is so like, Carter hates Alex so much, and I was talking about it with my friend who Joshua Tonks, and we were like,
yeah,
is there something going on here? Is Carter actually in love with Alex? Is that what's really going on here? Why is he so angry at Alex?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, if I was writing this script, if that had been because in my draft, I was kind of dancing around some of the that's one of my things is like, they kind of rewrote Carter to be such a dick from the open. That's his only character trait, is like, I'm a dick. Like every time you walk around, he's like shoving people, punching people, knocking people down. So I don't know. And Billy's always falling off a bicycle. Like, I don't even know why he's on a bicycle, but he's falling off of it all the time. So in my script, he wasn't such an asshole. There were a lot more layers to him that got stripped out. Since we're in this subject area, I will say, like, there was a little drama with the first script, because when I got the rewrite in, there were like 3 fag kind of comments and jokes in the script, and so I would always, Bob would give me every draft of the script, and I'd write my notes, and I'm like, hey, we've got like there was a joke before they went to the bathroom. There was a fag comment on the plane. And there were like 3 within the first 30 pages. So I wrote back to Bob, and I'm like, hey, we don't really need any of these, but we don't need 3 of them in the first 30 pages. Like it just stands out. And so they kept putting that note into the notes that went back to James and Glenn. And they were like, hey, could you take, and they kept coming back.
Yeah.
With comments still in there. So finally I wrote Bob just an email directly, because normally I would email him and he'd put my stuff in the notes that went back from the studio. And I was like, Bob, I don't understand why these were still in here. I said, I'm gay. If I'm doing publicity for these, like, what happens when somebody asks, like, well, what about these fag things? I'm going to say, oh, I tried to get them to take them out and they wouldn't do it. So Bob just forwarded that email to James and Glenn directly without any context, or without telling them that, oh, we've been giving Jeffrey every draft of the script and getting his input. So that caused a little bit of drama. The things went out, but Todd still mouths fag to Alex on the plane, which again, I'm not opposed to somebody using that word if it's like part of their character, but there were 3 other instances where I'm like, this is just, guys don't say that,
Yeah, and actually, it's a weird thing, because it feels like we kind of went a step backwards in cinema and in horror cinema through the 2000s, because it feels like in the 90s there was a kind of really nice wave of kind of interesting sort of female-led or female-driven horror and teen movies, with stuff like Kevin's Scream and Final Destination 2, actually, like you say, having a final boy and having these kind of interesting, for the most part, likable characters. When you get into the kind of Eli Roth's Hostel and those kind of movies, it did feel like the tide turned, and things became kind of, for whatever reason, sort of meaner, I guess. And for some people, for horror cinema, that's a better thing. You know, people have different opinions of it. But did you kind of feel that as a writer that, you know, horror movies were sort of beginning to change in this new decade of the 2000s?
I mean, yeah, they definitely started getting more brutal, which I'm fine with. Like, if the concept, especially the concept, merits it. Like, I thought Saw had a concept that merited the brutality. Like, I thought it was really good. I remember, when I was a teenager, like, that's all my friends cared about was like boobs and blood. And I was like, boob. You know, I mean, I wasn't boobs, I was blood. They were boobs and blood. But that's all they cared about in the movies is like, how much blood can we see? But then I think as the horror fans got older, then and especially as filmmakers like Wes Craven and John Carpenter started making more films that were not just about blood, and it's like fans started evolving and started wanting more. And then I think we kind of got back to at least the blood part of it, and then it turned into, let's see who can torture people the most, like, let's see how far we can push it.
The Final Destination franchise, I think, this is something that I'm always kind of interested in looking at in horror, is these kind of trends and the way in which the genre has shifted and evolved. And in some ways, the Final Destination franchise feels like a really interesting middle point between those kind of glossy 90s horrors and the slightly kind of gorier Saw type movies where you're watching these big elaborate death scenes happen, right? It almost feels like the Final Destination is that middle point between those kind of two eras of horror, Yeah. It's interesting.
And I think with Final Destination, like the key to those movies, it's not so much the death itself, it's kind of building that mousetrap kind of, is it going to happen this way? Is it going to happen this way? Is it going to happen this way? So I think that's where it's like, not so much we're going to torture somebody till they die. It's more like, what the hell's what's gonna fall on them or crush them or cut them?
Yes.
Or what's gonna get them? So
where's it gonna come from? Exactly. And actually, speaking of, let me ask you about Final Destination 2, which I remember very vividly. I was 16 when this came out. I saw it in the movie theater with friends. We had the best time, and I remember everyone in the cinema screaming and laughing, and and it feels like even now it's one of the fans' favorite movies, right? Do you sort of feel that yourself as someone involved in them? It feels like often people cite it as their favorite of the bunch.
Yeah, it's kind of honestly, it's kind of my favorite too, because I feel like it's closer to, I mean, even though, again, like, because every film and every creative process is evolving. So again, like, Final Destination went from like an X-Files mystery to like, adult to teenager to, death making people commit suicide. But once we locked into the Rube Goldberg aspect of it, I felt a lot more ownership of the second one, because I got to really do, I wrote the story for that one, and I got to do what I love doing in sequels, which is bringing back, some of the OG players and expanding the mythology and retelling the same movie. I was really proud, and they kind of just brush it off in the van, but it's still up. But it's like, oh yeah, I cheated death too, because somebody from the first movie was alive. So
I love that moment. Yeah,
but I made more of a meal of it in my treatment. But I was like, well, at least it's out. But it expanded the mythology, and it showed that we're all connected. And the log truck opening, that was, originally it was going to be a hotel fire. I think they used that for a comic book version, but the producer was like, Craig was like, we need something bigger. We need something bigger than a hotel fire. And again, I was heading back to Kentucky to see my family, and I got behind a log truck, and I pulled over, and then I pulled off the freeway, and I called Craig, and I was like really excited. He's like, well, slow down, I can't understand you. And I'm like, what about a log truck on a freeway and the chain snaps and the logs? And he's like, that's it. That's the opening. So
yeah. Phenomenal opening set piece, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think, again, like one of those moments that the franchise is sort of remembered for.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? What is it about that sequence, do you think, specifically, that has really, still to this day, 20 years later, struck a chord? Like, you'll see like memes of it every day almost online.
Yeah. Well, I think it's two things. I think one, we all drive, and there's always somebody.
Yeah.
There's either a very secure log truck in front of us, or there's somebody with a really janky setup that's like got some rope or shit, and you're like, this is not safe. So I think that you just see that. But I also, David Ellis, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, directed that movie. And Jay Mackey Gruber and Eric Bress wrote the screenplay based off my story. And I think David Ellis he was a stuntman, so I think he also directed that scene so well.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite openings. It's only out of all my movies, I'll only say one of mine has one of my favorite horror movies opening all time, and it's that one. But there's others some other great, but that's one of my favorite openings. Like I can watch that. Like it's weird. My neighbors probably think I'm like some kind of psycho murderer. They just hear me up,
same here.
They hear me up late at night, and they're like, "There's a lot of screaming and."
Yeah, I know. I so often feel like I've got to just turn my volume down and just like what people think of me. But yeah, like that, I think there's something about it. Like you said, it's that mix of kind of everydayness because we all have driven on freeways. Like I think, with the roller coaster one, as fun as that is, it doesn't quite feel as everyday like it could just happen.
Yeah.
Whereas there's something specifically about that freeway, that traffic part, and it's really... It feels like so much of it, of course, was kind of practically done, like you said, and it was stunts, right? And you can just really feel there's something that's like tangible and real about it, isn't there? I think, it's so clever.
I wanted to kind of set up where, we start off with a group of teenagers and you're like, oh, it's going to be another group of teenagers, and then murder all of them except for AJ Cook.
Yes.
So that was So I got to do a lot of really... At least from a story angle, there was so much fun stuff that I was like, I get to like fuck around with people in a sequel and do this. So
yeah. And how did you find that one tonally? In terms of compared to the first one, because it definitely does shift, doesn't it? Like there's a lot less time, for example, post that initial accident where people are grieving and dealing with what just happened, like that. There's quite a considerable chunk of the first movie where we are spending time with these characters. Whereas this one, it's like, right, straight to the kills, isn't it, basically?
It is. And it's always tough because, especially when you're in a sequel, you want to care for the characters and you don't want them to be like, oh, our friends are dead. Let's go get pizza. But for this one, because people kind of, it's almost like it's a weird balance because the audience knows what's going to happen going in, so you don't want to spend so much time with people rehashing like, well, what could this be or what might this be? So I love like the later movies that were just like, well, you heard about Flight 180 crashing and then that so in the movies, like the accidents and the deaths are kind of known, so people can immediately latch onto it, and then it's like whether you believe it or not, that's a little that you can have some gray area there. But yeah, the grieving mournfulness kind of went out of them a little bit, which for me, again, I don't mind it because for me they're fun. Yeah. If I want to grieve, I'll go watch Hereditary and just sit and grieve for hours.
Yeah, exactly. These movies have that kind of, they are slasher movies in a way, right? Where you're it's like when you go watch a great Friday the 13th movie, you're watching it for the kind of fun set pieces, aren't you? More than anything else, Especially, it feels like particularly from part 2 onwards, it feels like that's when this franchise becomes that, I suppose. Yeah.
And you still want the characters. Like I think that and I know we're going through them, but like that's what I think. What part 5 did so well is, I think with part 4, still adore that movie, but they had to write that before the writer's strike, so it didn't have the development time that all the other Final Destination movies had. They called it The Final Destination, which obviously in horror terms usually means we're going to wrap everything up here, and they didn't wrap anything up, so the fans kind of went in and expecting, we're going to find out more about Tony Todd, or we're going to figure out we're going to figure out the grand plan. So I think they were disappointed when that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because it did really well at the box office. So they're like, well, let's take our time with the next one. And you can tell that part 5 was like written for the fans because they actually did like make the connections. People were going through breakups and Tony Todd had a lot more, Tony Todd was a lot. And, it had that cool twist about if you kill somebody. So they gave them they gave them more of a moral dilemma to deal with as opposed
Yes.
a vague clue. So part 5, I adore that one as well.
Completely agree. I absolutely love it. Let me quickly ask you about, so post part 2, how involved were you with the rest of the series from this point onwards?
Yeah, I haven't been really involved except for, like I have a lot of conversations with Craig Perry.
Yeah.
So he'll sometimes he'll bounce ideas off me sometimes where we're thinking this or this or this. But yeah, I haven't been really involved in it. It's funny because I would love to do another one. The ego part of me is I would love to explore other ways, because death is a design, but it's death can change that design. So I'd almost love to explore different ways to do it, but I know the studio just doesn't,
Yeah, it's so hard. How that must be hard. I guess this is just what comes with being a screenwriter often, right? But that idea of you create something or co-create something, and then you just kind of have to hand it over to someone else, right? Your baby is kind of given to someone else to continue.
Yeah, and to be honest, if I don't mind that, because I think that's part of the good part of working at a studio for so long is I know how the business side of stuff works all the time. So I'm able to keep my ego out of it. I just, because I felt with the first movie and especially with the second one, I got to do what I wanted to do with it. And I'm so proud of just the concept and the, the pattern, death's pattern, how it's going, killing them or they would have died. All this stuff that I created is still part of that DNA going forward. So I'm actually, it's interesting to see how other people, kind of interpret that. I would just, like I said, I just think there's room to expand the death universe and how death gets people. Again, I love the Rube Goldberg aspect of it, but I think you could say death has a new design and kind of try something fresh. But obviously people go to see Final Destination for the Rube Goldberg stuff. So it's
yeah. What were your thoughts on Final Destination 3 and 4 and 5? Did you go see them at the theater? Were you kind of involved pre-release in any way? When did you first discover them?
I went to a test screening of 4, but then I've been to the premieres of all the other ones. But I think part 4 was the one I went to a test screening for. And no, it's it's fun. They're all fun and they're all different. They've all got their tonal kind of shifts. I'm not a big fan of gratuitous nudity, so I think that tanning bed scene always irks me.
Because actually there's not a lot of nudity or sex in these movies generally, right? And you're right. I think rewatching them again, that nudity in that part 3 does kind of stick out almost a little bit, doesn't it, from everything else?
Yeah. There was a flash of boobs in the second one. A second, but and I have not again, I've written movies with sex in them, and if a story require it's not I'm anti-sex in movies. It's just when I grew up, it was just such it was just so gratuitous. It's let's just get this lady naked in the shower for 5 minutes and then kill her. The tanning bed scene in 3 is the only scene in the franchise that I don't like because it goes on so long. It's they take their tops off and then they jiggle around to music.
Yeah.
And I know all the straight guys are so what's your problem? No, but just creatively, it's just and then they lay in the tanning bed with their tops off forever. And then they start getting fried. It's just such a long ass scene. That I was that's just too much.
Yeah. And also 2 of the most fun characters, I think, they kill off too early. So keep them in it for a bit longer too.
They were really fun. So, but 3 I like because it kind of brought back James and Glenn's dark humor. I mean, they did get to add a character saying, "Please tell me I don't die with something going up my butt." They did get to add a guy saying that. So they got that gay stuff. They got that homophobic stuff in there.
Yeah.
I'm halfway kidding. I enjoyed 3. I enjoyed 4. Again, I know people rag on it because they just don't feel like, but again, I just know the behind the scenes stuff is, Eric's a great writer but he had a very short, they decided to greenlight the movie when it looked like the strike was when they were like, oh, the strike's really going to happen, we better greenlight this. So they just like, right, and then we're taking your first, you know what I'm saying? So he didn't have to develop the script, but I still think it's really fun, like, NASCAR fun,
Yeah, because it's interesting because it's directed by David Ellis as well, isn't it? Who directed part 2.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily feel like it has that sort of, I think there's more CGI, right? And obviously it's 3D, so there's like a lot more of that kind of stuff going on. And I wonder if that also, it somehow doesn't have the kind of like the weight of those stunts that David directed in part 2, for example, as well.
Yeah, it's hard when you start doing stuff in 3D because it's a whole different shooting process. But again, as far as a fun movie, I mean, I like, that's the thing is like there aren't any that I don't like. Like and I would be honest, like if there was like one in the franchise that I didn't like, and I'm like, oh, that, but I'm also, because I've been in the business so long, I've kind of had to, because a lot of my films have started off like studio films, but then companies merge and then it goes into turnaround and the movie gets made for like $200,000.
Yeah.
So I've kind of had to adjust my thinking when I look at kind of just all my movies. And the only one that I don't like is the first one I did, which was Return to Cabin by the Lake, which is a TV movie. And the only reason that one I don't like is because it's a sequel to this movie, Cabin by the Lake, and it had Judd Nelson in it. And I wrote a really good script, like, because I'm like, all right, this has to be good enough for Judd Nelson to want to come back and play this character again. And then they greenlit it. Judd Nelson read it, signed on, and then the studio executive decided that the script was too clever for the USA audience.
Wow!
So he literally had somebody come in and dumb the script down to like super basic storytelling. And then I think the director got annoyed because he almost directed it like a comedy. So the producer was not, she's like, I can't even watch this movie without crying. She goes, I can't send you, I won't send you an early screening of it because it's just going to bother you. And then I saw it on TV and I was like, awful. But yeah, I've liked all my other films, for flaws and all.
Of course, yeah. And actually all of the Final Destination films, like I think it's generally considered among so many horror fans, right? We have so many big franchises out there with 5 or more entries that have their real highs and real lows, right? I would say that Final Destination is up there with maybe the Chucky movies and maybe the Scream movies as the most consistently fun and quality horror franchise, right? Like, and I think that's a really lovely thing and kind of unusual in a way that 5 was it felt at the time like a definitive full stop, like a definitive ending on that saga as well, right? Like, which is a really interesting thing considering how popular these movies were. But like, it seemed like that was the idea, right? For 5 to kind of round everything off. I don't think it was to end it, because I'm 99% sure that Craig had that idea for the ending, and they were originally going to do that for part 4. I mean, yeah, because the movies have all done well, and it's just, the only difference between our movies, like, it probably were on the same thing as the Scream level, but they're not cheap to make. Like, Blumhouse budgets of like $5 million, so they cost a little bit more, especially when you do them in 3D, because of the set pieces and everything. But yeah, no, it's been. I mean, the fans have, it's one of those franchises. Obviously I'm biased because I'm the creator of it, and it's like I want more. Like, yeah.
Why does Friday the 13th have like 90? I know it's not 90, but like 20 spin-offs and all this other stuff, and we've only had 5 movies so far. But Scream just did 5 and 6 last year, so we're finally gonna catch up with Scream. But yeah.
So is it definitely happening?
Yes.
A new Final Destination, right? It is. Yeah. That's super exciting. Is there anything? Do you know much about it? Are you involved in any way in this? New one?
I know all about it, but I'm not working on it.
Sure.
But I can't say anything. It is happening. Most of the stuff on the internet, like that has been, fan art and fan stuff over the years, it's not related to any of that. And there should be an announcement coming out, by the summer about an update. What's going on.
Oh, cool.
Some specific details. John Watts, who did the Spider-Man movies, came up with the story. They brought in a superstar team on this one. So I'm really excited with the story and where they're going with it, because it is going to be different. It's not going to be like what I was about earlier about like changing Death's MO completely, and it's not going to be completely revamping it, but they've got a very clever story. So it's not just, accident. Somebody shows up and says, here's a rule to get out of this. And they try to follow the rules. So it's, there's a lot more going on. So,
that's awesome, because horror has changed a lot in the last decade, right? It feels like we've kind of entered a new, almost sort of golden age of the genre, since we've had people like Jordan Peele and Mike Flanagan, Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, and people like this, right? And horror has kind of gone off in a different direction. But I do feel like also there is such a want now for these like fun, beloved horror properties that are coming back. Like you said, we've got Scream back. We've had some new Halloween movies. Yeah. It feels like a perfect time, right, to bring Final Destination back, I think.
Yeah. Somebody pointed out it was like, if it's been 12 years, so if the movie comes out next year, it'll come out it'll be 13 years since the last one. I'm like,
perfect.
You could have made a lot of, but you could have made a lot more. I want a fucking Final Destination every 2 years, motherfuckers.
Right? we could have a Netflix miniseries now, Final Destination.
We pushed, they're sticking the movies for now.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I guess it's like you said. I guess also it's an expensive. I never really thought about that, but I guess compared to a lot of kind of slasher franchises, they must be pretty expensive to make these.
Yeah,
movies.
You could do a series that wouldn't be that expensive though.
Yeah.
But yeah, put that out in the universe. It's
absolutely.
I always say I'm guardedly optimistic. I've just got to start being like fake positively optimistic, where I just think everything's going to happen that I want to happen. That's my goal, starting at this moment. So,
let's make it happen. I would love that. I would love it. We do need more Final Destination out there in the world. I love it. Just a couple of final questions for you, Jeffrey. And I know you probably get asked this so much, but what is your favorite set piece from this whole series? If you had to pick one, what's your favorite kind of death / kind of set piece in general?
I always have a double answer for that one. I cannot lie.
Yeah.
If it's no, my favorite set piece is the log truck opening. So people ask me what my favorite deaths are. That's okay. Yeah, the log truck opening. That's my favorite set piece.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Favorite death though. I've got to ask you then. What's your favorite death?
Well, it's two. It's for an awful reason, but I like Todd's death in the first one.
Yeah.
Because it's so real and it's so
agreed
painful, and I don't like
that's it's kind of the most emotionally gut punching set piece in the whole franchise, I think. And I hate real life violence, and I cry if anybody dies, so I don't want to sound sadistic saying that, but and then I have to say the gymnastic scene in part 5. Yes.
That was the first time that I've been in one of those movies and actually screamed like a baby. Not like I was like, what the fuck? Because just the way. Well, spoiler. It's not only with her, but when she lands and it cracks her body in two. I was just I literally screamed out in the theater, and that hasn't happened to me in any of the other ones.
It's genuinely shocking, that moment, isn't it?
Really,
so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Perfect. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for joining me. It's been such a joy to kind of hear your memories and experiences of these movies. And is there anything that you've got, you're a busy screenwriter. Is there anything that you've got kind of coming up this year that anyone should keep a lookout for?
As long as the strike, the Screen Actors Guild doesn't go on strike, I'll be directing my first slasher movie this summer, so I'm really excited about that.
Oh wow, amazing! Anything you can tell us about that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't yet, but only that it'll. It's a very cool setup. It's it is going to be it's going to be an old school slasher film, not meta. Like it's an old school kind of slasher film. So I'm really excited about it.
Yes. I love this. I also think let's bring back the slasher properly as well, not just in an ironic way, but I would love to see the return of proper slashers again.
There's no irony in this slasher movie.
Amazing.
So I'm really excited about that. And I'm producing a couple of projects. One that's getting ready to shoot down in Dallas. I'm staying busy. I'm going to go picket in a little bit for the strike. Hopefully that doesn't go on too long.
Wonderful. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for your time. My last question, again, probably a question you get asked a lot, but I have to ask all my guests. What is your favorite ever horror film?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, perfect choice.
Yeah.
And I take it you mean the 1984
one. The original. The original.
Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely.
Incredible. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. Have a great evening over there, and I'll have a great day over here.
And there we go. A big thank you to the brilliant Jeffrey Reddick. Loved that conversation. Well, there we go. I feel like we are all now primed and ready. We've rewatched the 5 original movies. We've listened to the discussion with the creator of the franchise, Jeffrey Reddick. Now all that's left to do is watch the new movie and discuss it in depth. So stay tuned for a spoilerific review of Final Destination Bloodlines, which is now out in cinemas, dropping on this feed very soon. Join us again soon for another bonus episode of the Evolution of Horror.